My ruthless billionaire ex-husband showed off his new fiancée on Christmas Eve, then I walked in with the baby he never knew existed. The last place I wanted to be on Christmas Eve was at the Harrington estate, with its manicured perfection and rooms full of people who had whispered about my downfall. Yet there I stood, in the grand foyer with its soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers, holding my sleeping daughter against my shoulder while snowflakes melted in her dark curls. Amelia. His voice stopped me cold. I turned to face Damien Harrington, devastatingly handsome in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my apartment's yearly rent. His dark eyes widened at the sight of the child in my arms. Is that your daughter? Yes. This is Linda. She turned 7 months old yesterday. That's impossible. We've been divorced for over a year. 15 months, I corrected. And pregnancies last 9. Do the math, Damien. I watched his perfect world crumble in real time as his new fiancée, a beautiful runway model in a red dress, noticed our conversation from across the room. The massive ruby on her finger caught the light as she started walking toward us. His father, the great Victor Harrington, was already announcing they were minutes away from the special engagement announcement. I didn't plan this confrontation for Christmas Eve. I hadn't planned it at all. But fate has a way of creating the perfect storm when you least expect it. If you've ever had a moment where your entire life changed in an instant, hit that like button right now. And if you know what it's like to stand your ground even when your heart is pounding out of your chest, subscribe to Mr. Arden's Heart Stories, because some stories need to be told, and some truths need to be heard. Around us, the glittering crowd of Manhattan's elite continued their choreographed dance of champagne flutes and practiced laughter, completely oblivious to the earthquake happening in our small pocket of silence. Crystal decorations caught the light from massive chandeliers, sending prisms of color across the marble floor. The 20-foot Christmas tree in the center of the foyer glowed with hundreds of white lights, each ornament worth more than most people's monthly rent. Everything about the Harrington Christmas Eve gala screamed old money, power, and exclusivity. Damien's gaze hadn't left Linda's sleeping face. His jaw flexed as he struggled to maintain the composure he was famous for in boardrooms across the country. That we need to talk. Privately. Now. He didn't wait for my response. His hand found the small of my back, guiding me away from curious onlookers toward his father's study, a room I remembered all too well from family meetings that felt more like corporate takeovers. The pressure of his palm against my coat was light but insistent, sending unwelcome tingles up my spine despite everything that had happened between us. As he steered me through the crowd, I caught snippets of whispered conversations. Isn't that Amelia Kaplan? The ex-wife? What's she doing here? Is that a baby? His fiancée Elise Winters, daughter of banking magnate William Winters, watched our retreat with narrowed eyes, her perfect red lips pressing into a thin line. She made a subtle move to follow, but Damien's sister Ava intercepted her with practiced ease, drawing her into conversation with an elderly couple dripping in diamonds. Ava caught my eye over Elise's shoulder and gave me a barely perceptible nod. She'd been the one who convinced me to come tonight, never mentioning her brother's engagement announcement would be the centerpiece of the evening. The study door closed behind us with a solid thunk that felt oddly final. The room remained exactly as I remembered: dark mahogany paneling, leather-bound books arranged by height rather than subject, and the overwhelming scent of expensive cigars. The imposing portrait of Victor Harrington hung above the fireplace, his steel-gray eyes following accusingly as we moved across the room. Linda stirred against my shoulder, her tiny fists clenching as she sensed the tension in my body. I patted her back gently, the instinctive motion of a mother soothing her child. Why didn't you tell me? Damien's controlled facade slipped, revealing raw emotion, anger, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite name. I tried. The words came out more bitter than I intended. That's not possible. I would have remembered something like this, Amelia. Would you? I shifted Linda to my other arm, her weight both comfort and shield. The first time, I called your office. Your new executive assistant said you were unavailable indefinitely and wouldn't take personal calls from Miss Kaplan anymore. His jaw tightened. Claire screens calls according to my instructions, but not for something like this. The second time, I emailed you directly. When that bounced back as undeliverable, I sent a registered letter to your office. I met his gaze steadily. It was returned unopened, marked refused by the recipient. I never refused any letter from you. Someone did, Damien. Someone decided I wasn't worth your precious time. Linda whimpered, sensing my rising emotions. I immediately softened my voice, bouncing gently until she settled again against my shoulder. Her dark curls tickled my chin as I pressed a kiss to the top of her head, breathing in the baby shampoo scent that always centered me. Damien watched this interaction with fascination, as though seeing a new species in its natural habitat. She looks like... He hesitated. She has my mother's eyes. I know. It was one of the first things I'd noticed, those distinctive amber-flecked brown eyes that had skipped Damien but appeared in his daughter. His mother had been kind, a warmth in the cold Harrington world until cancer took her when Damien was in college. After the letter was returned, I stopped trying. I continued quietly. I decided if the universe was throwing up that many barriers, maybe she wasn't meant to know her father. That wasn't your decision to make. His voice hardened again, the boardroom tone returning. Wasn't it? You made it clear our marriage was a failed business venture. Why would I think you'd approach fatherhood any differently? Before he could respond, the door opened. Elise Winters stepped inside, her perfect features arranged in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Designer heels clicked sharply against the hardwood as she approached. Darling, everyone's wondering where you've disappeared to. Her gaze flicked dismissively over me before landing on Linda. Oh, I didn't realize you were in a meeting. Not a meeting, Damien said, his voice unnaturally even. Elise, this is Amelia. My ex-wife. Of course. Her smile tightened. Ava mentioned you might come. How thoughtful of you to bring your child to an evening event. Elise, Damien interrupted, could you give us a moment? It's important. A flash of irritation crossed her perfect features before she smoothed it away. Don't be too long. Your father wants to make the announcement at 9. She closed the door with deliberate softness, the click somehow more jarring than a slam would have been. The announcement? I asked, though I already knew. The official engagement. And my appointment as CEO. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. Contingent on the engagement, of course. Victor believes the company needs stable leadership and a proper Harrington family at the helm. Congratulations. I couldn't keep the irony from my voice. You finally got everything you wanted. Did I? For a moment, the mask slipped completely, revealing a weariness I hadn't expected. I built Nexus Tech from nothing while still in college. My innovations quadrupled the company's value. But to my father, I'm still just a placeholder for the next generation. His gaze moved to Linda. A generation I didn't know existed until 10 minutes ago. Linda chose that moment to wake fully, blinking her amber-flecked eyes at the strange room before focusing on Damien with uncanny intensity. Her serious expression, so like his when concentrating, gave way to a sudden, radiant smile that transformed her entire face. Damien looked stunned, as though he'd been struck by lightning. She doesn't smile at strangers, I said softly. She's remarkably discriminating for a 7-month-old. May I? He hesitated, the ruthless billionaire suddenly uncertain. Hold her. If you'd like. I transferred Linda carefully into his inexperienced arms, adjusting his hold until she was secure. He stood rigidly at first, terrified of making a mistake, then gradually relaxed as she continued to study him with fascination. Hello, Linda, he said formally, as though introducing himself to a business associate. She responded by reaching up to grab his tie, tugging it with surprising strength. Already going for the power move, I said with a small smile. She's definitely your daughter. The door opened again, this time revealing Victor Harrington. Despite his illness, he still commanded the room, his silver hair and impeccable suit projecting authority. Deep lines carved into his face were the only indication of the cancer that was slowly consuming him from within. The guests are waiting, Damien. It's time for him to stop abruptly, taking in the scene before him. I'd never seen Victor Harrington speechless before. He stared at his son holding the baby, comprehension dawning in his cold eyes. What is the meaning of this? This is Linda, Damien said, his voice steady even as our daughter continued to clutch his tie. My daughter. Victor's gaze cut to me, sharp as a blade. Another of your manipulations, Miss Kaplan. Convenient timing. Father, Damien's voice held a warning I'd never heard him use with Victor before. That's enough. This changes nothing, Victor declared after a moment. The announcement proceeds as planned. We'll deal with this situation afterward. No. The single word hung in the air between them. Excuse me. I said no. Damien looked down at Linda, then at me, before facing his father squarely. I've just discovered I have a daughter I never knew existed. I won't stand in that ballroom and announce an engagement while I'm still processing that fact. Victor's face hardened. You've worked for this moment your entire life. Everything is in place. The board, the shareholders, Elisa's family connections. You'll throw it all away for a child you've known for 5 minutes. I've spent my life trying to earn your approval, Damien replied quietly. It's cost me everything that actually matters, including, apparently, the chance to know my daughter from her first breath. Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice. If you walk away from this announcement, you walk away from everything. The CEO position, your place on the board, your inheritance. I've indulged your rebellion long enough. I'd seen this scene play out before Victor threatened, Damien eventually capitulating. It was the dynamic that had poisoned our marriage and transformed Damien into someone I could no longer recognize. This time, however, something different happened. Damien looked down at Linda, who had fallen asleep against his chest, still clutching his tie in her tiny fist. Then he looked at me, really looked, for what felt like the first time in years. You know what I realized, Father? His voice was calm, almost conversational. Nexus Tech, my company that you absorbed, is currently worth more than all the traditional Harrington investments combined. I've been fighting for your approval when I should have been fighting for control. Victor's expression darkened. You wouldn't dare. I would. I've spent years learning every aspect of this business, including its vulnerabilities. Damien carefully shifted Linda back into my arms. Make whatever announcement you want tonight. Tomorrow, my lawyers will be in touch. Victor stared at his son as though seeing him for the first time. You would destroy your family legacy. For what? Not destroy it. Reclaim it. Damien glanced at the portrait above the fireplace. Grandfather built this company to create opportunities, not dynasties. Somewhere along the way, you forgot that. Victor's face flushed with anger. You'll regret this. Probably, Damien agreed with surprising equanimity. I seem to have a talent for making decisions I later regret. But not this time. After Victor stormed out, silence filled the study. I stood holding our sleeping daughter, uncertain what had just happened or what it meant. I'm sorry, Damien said finally. For what specifically? I asked. There's quite a list to choose from. For all of it. He moved to the window, watching snow continue to fall on the estate grounds. For becoming someone you couldn't recognize. For missing the birth of my daughter. For not fighting harder when you left. You didn't fight at all, I said quietly. I know. He turned back to face me. I thought I was protecting you from what I was becoming. I didn't need protection, Damien. I needed a partner. And now? I looked down at Linda, peaceful despite the storm brewing around her. Now I need a co-parent who will put his daughter first. Not a CEO or an heir or whatever your father wants you to be. What about Elise? I asked the question that had been hovering between us. An arrangement, not a relationship. He shook his head. Victor orchestrated it. The Winters family controls keyboard seats we needed. In return, they wanted the Harrington name and connections. That sounds incredibly healthy. My sarcasm made him wince. I need to speak with her. His expression was grim. This will end her social plans, not to mention infuriate her father. The path of true business arrangements never did run smooth, I quipped, though the humor felt hollow. Have you ever stood your ground knowing it would cost you everything? Comment, worth it, if you believe some principles are too important to compromise, no matter what you might lose. It hadn't always been like this between us. The Damien I first met 6 years ago was nothing like the ruthless businessman who graced magazine covers and struck fear into competitors. Back then, he was the brilliant but reluctant heir to the Harrington fortune, more comfortable in coding marathons than boardrooms. And I was simply Amelia Kaplan, the new exhibition curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, hired to modernize their digital archives worlds away from his financial empire. The night we met changed everything. I was struggling with a glitching donor presentation at the museum's annual fundraising gala, frantically tapping at a tablet as wealthy patrons began to murmur in disapproval. The technical failure threatened not just the evening but potentially my entire career. Your database architecture is prehistoric, a voice said from behind me. I turned to see a man in a slightly rumpled tuxedo, dark hair falling over one eye in a way that suggested he cared little for appearances. Thank you for that insightful observation, I replied, continuing to tap at the frozen screen as sweat beaded along my hairline. Unless you have a solution in the next 30 seconds, please save your critique. To my surprise, he took the tablet from my hands, his fingers flying across the screen with practiced confidence. The system's overloading because your queries are inefficient. You're asking it to process too much media at once. Within moments, the presentation flowed seamlessly across the giant screen surrounding us. You just saved my career, I exhaled as applause filled the room. I'm Amelia Kaplan. Damien, he smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. Just Damien tonight. He stayed by my side for the remainder of the evening, helping me navigate both the technical issues and the social dynamics of New York's elite. We talked about everything except our backgrounds, art, technology, the city's best hidden restaurants, books we'd recently read. He asked questions and actually listened to my answers, a refreshing change from the typical gala small talk. When he asked for my number at the end of the night, I gave it without hesitation, already imagining our first date. It wasn't until 3 days later, over coffee at a tiny cafe in Greenwich Village, that I realized I'd been flirting with Damien Harrington, sole heir to the Harrington investment empire worth billions. Wait, Harrington as in Harrington Capital? The company that owns half of Manhattan? I'd nearly choked on my latte. Technically only about 12% of Manhattan, he'd corrected with a self-deprecating smile. But yes, that Harrington. Is that going to be a problem? I remember studying him across the table, wondering if I should run while I still could. But it was already too late. I'd fallen for the man who spent weekends building free apps for nonprofits and who could talk for hours about art history, not the figure in Forbes. It depends, I'd said finally. Does being a Harrington mean you expect the check to magically pay itself? He'd laughed then, a genuine sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. I was thinking we might split it, actually. I'm trying to live on what I earn myself these days, not my trust fund. In that case, I'd smiled, reaching for the bill. I'll get this one. You can get the next. There was something refreshingly honest about Damien in those early days. He drove a sensible car rather than the sports cars his friends favored. He lived in a loft in Chelsea that he'd renovated himself rather than the penthouse his father had offered him. He wore the same watch his grandfather had given him for college graduation instead of the luxury timepieces that graced the wrists of other Harrington men. Our courtship was a whirlwind of contrasts. One night we'd attend a black-tie gala where everyone knew his name. The next, we'd eat street tacos in Brooklyn where no one cared who we were. He showed me his world of financial power and old money, and I introduced him to artists, writers, and musicians who were rich only in creativity. We'd argue passionately about whether technology was democratizing art or just commodifying it in new ways. We'd stay up until dawn coding a program that could identify paintings by brushstroke patterns. We'd spend Sundays lost in flea markets, looking for vintage tech that Damien would restore just for the challenge. I fell in love with his mind first, the way it never stopped working, connecting ideas across disciplines, seeing patterns where others saw chaos. Then I fell for his heart, how he genuinely wanted to use his fortune and privilege to solve real problems, not just accumulate more wealth. Finally, I fell for the man who looked at me like I was a puzzle he wanted to spend a lifetime solving. When he proposed 11 months after we met, it wasn't at a 5-star restaurant or exotic destination. He took me back to the museum after hours, to the exact spot where we'd first spoken. He'd hacked the digital displays to show a slideshow of our relationship photos, text messages, ticket stubs, all the digital breadcrumbs of our love story. "I want to build something meaningful with you," he'd said, kneeling in the empty gallery. "Not because you're the appropriate choice or because it makes business sense, but because you make me want to be better than I am. You make me believe I can be more than just a Harrington." We married at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden in spring, surrounded by cherry blossoms and only our closest friends and family. His father, Victor Harrington, deemed it disappointingly modest despite its feature in Vogue. I wore a vintage dress I'd found in a small boutique rather than a designer label. Damien's best man was his college roommate, now running a tech startup Damien had quietly funded. My maid of honor was my childhood friend who taught public school in Queens. For 2 years, we were happy, a miracle in the pressure cooker of New York high society. Damien fought his father for control of the company's direction, arguing that technology, not traditional investments, was the future. I expanded the museum's digital footprint, bringing art to communities that could never visit in person. "We're going to change things," he'd whisper at night, his dreams mixing with mine until they became indistinguishable. "Create something meaningful together." We renovated a brownstone in Park Slope, combining his technical expertise with my eye for aesthetics. We traveled not to luxury resorts but to tech conferences and art installations around the world. We started a small foundation that bridged technology and arts education in underserved schools. The cracks appeared gradually, then suddenly like ice breaking on a winter lake. Victor's heart attack forced Damien to take over as CEO earlier than planned. The man who came home each night grew distant, his mind perpetually elsewhere. Board meetings replaced our dinner dates. The light in his eyes dimmed, replaced by the hard calculation of someone playing a game with stakes too high to comprehend. "It's temporary," he'd promised, kissing my forehead distractedly as he packed for yet another business trip. "Once I stabilize things, we'll get back to our plans." But temporary became permanent. His father recovered physically while maintaining an iron grip on the company's direction. Legacy before innovation was the Harrington way. Each time Damien fought for change, Victor undermined him, using his controlling shares and board influence as weapons. I watched my husband transform into someone I barely recognized, a man whose voice grew sharper, whose decisions became ruthless, whose ambition consumed everything else. The Damien I knew would never have approved that acquisition. I confronted him after reading about a particularly aggressive takeover that had left hundreds unemployed. "Those people had families, retirement plans. Your company stripped the assets and closed the facilities. You don't understand what's at stake," he'd said during our last real conversation. "This is business, Amelia. Not one of your art exhibitions that I understand perfectly," I'd replied, my voice shaking. "You've become exactly what you swore you'd never be, your father." We slept in separate rooms after that night. He worked later, traveled more. I threw myself into my career, staying at the museum until security would politely remind me it was time to leave. We existed in the same space without connecting, 2 planets in separate orbits. 2 months later, I filed for divorce. 3 months after that, it was finalized with clinical efficiency. Damien didn't fight for our marriage, the prenuptial agreement made the financial division simple. I took nothing but what I'd brought into the relationship: my career, my independence, and what remained of my heart. What I didn't know then was that I was already carrying our child, a secret hidden so early even my body hadn't revealed it yet. The morning sickness hit 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized. At first, I attributed it to stress, to grief, to the exhaustion of rebuilding a life without the person I'd planned to spend forever with. When I finally took a pregnancy test, sitting alone on the floor of my new apartment's bathroom, the 2 pink lines seemed impossible. How could new life form in a marriage that was already dead? How could something be growing while everything else was falling apart? I sat on that cold tile floor for hours, calculating options, weighing responsibilities, imagining futures. By morning, I knew what I had to do. This child, wanted or not, planned or not, deserved to know both parents. Damien deserved to know he had created a life, even if he chose not to be part of it. My first attempt to reach him was by phone. I called his direct line at Harrington Capital, a number few people had. "I'm sorry, Miss Kaplan," his new executive assistant, Claire, said with practiced politeness. "Mr. Harrington is unavailable indefinitely and has instructed that he will not be taking personal calls from you." "This isn't a personal matter," I insisted. "It's urgent and affects him directly." "I'll pass along the message that you called, but I can make no promises." That was the last I heard. My next attempt was email, sent directly to his personal address. It bounced back immediately: "Your message could not be delivered. The email address you entered couldn't be found." Finally, I wrote a letter, pen on paper, my handwriting steady despite my racing heart. "Damien, I am pregnant with your child. I'm not asking for anything from you, financially or otherwise. I simply believe you have the right to know and to decide what role, if any, you want to play in this child's life. If you want to discuss this, you know how to reach me. Amelia." I sent it certified mail to his office, requiring a signature for delivery. 2 weeks later, it returned to my mailbox unopened, stamped with red letters: "Returned to sender. Refused by recipient." After that, I stopped trying. 3 attempts, 3 rejections. The universe was sending a clear message, and I finally listened. This baby would be mine alone, and perhaps that was for the best. Better no father than one who didn't want to be found. The pregnancy wasn't easy. Morning sickness lasted well into my 2nd trimester. My blood pressure rose, causing my doctor concern. I worked until I physically couldn't, knowing I needed every dollar of paid maternity leave I could accrue. The museum was understanding but confused. I'd never mentioned wanting children during my marriage. Now, suddenly divorced, I was expecting. Colleagues whispered, though never within earshot. Friends offered support, though few understood my refusal to pursue Damien for child support. "I don't want his money," I explained to my best friend as she helped me assemble a second-hand crib. "I want my child to grow up without the Harrington weight on their shoulders." The birth was long and difficult. 26 hours of labor ended in an emergency C-section when the baby's heart rate dropped dangerously low. I went into the operating room alone, no hand to hold, no partner to witness the arrival of our child. When the doctor lifted a squalling, red-faced baby girl above the surgical drape, I felt a love so fierce it stole my breath. Linda Kaplan entered the world at 3:47 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday in May, weighing 6 pounds, 3 ounces. She had a full head of dark hair, 10 perfect fingers, 10 perfect toes, and eyes that, when they finally opened, revealed the distinctive amber-flecked brown of Catherine Harrington, Damien's mother. The nurse placed her on my chest, this tiny person who hadn't existed before and now would be the center of my universe forever. I whispered promises against her downy head that I would be enough for her, that I would protect her from harm, that I would never let anyone make her feel unwanted. If you've ever held your child for the first time and felt your entire world shift on its axis, drop a heart in the comments. And if you're raising a child alone by choice or circumstance, know that you are seen. Your strength doesn't go unnoticed. The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights, pediatrician appointments, and the slow adjustment to a new normal. Linda was an alert baby, watching the world with those knowing Harrington eyes, rarely crying but demanding attention in quieter ways. She reached milestones early, holding her head up, rolling over, grasping toys. Her pediatrician remarked on her focus, unusual for an infant. At night, when she finally slept, I'd sometimes study her features in the dim glow of the nightlight, cataloging what came from me and what came from Damien. My chin, his forehead. My ears, his nose. A perfect blend of two people who couldn't make a marriage work but had somehow created this flawless human being. I returned to work when Linda was 12 weeks old, leaving her with a kind older woman who ran a small daycare from her home. The guilt was crushing those first weeks, missing her first real smile, her first laugh. But the practical reality of single motherhood in New York City left little room for idealism. We needed my salary, my health insurance, my 401k contributions. I settled into a routine of work, childcare, home, repeat. Occasionally friends would drag me out for a much-needed adult conversation, but mostly my world narrowed to Linda and survival. I read parenting books during my subway commute. I learned to type museum reports with one hand while holding a baby with the other. I became expert at finding sales on diapers, at stretching groceries, at saying no to unnecessary expenses. I never regretted my decision not to pursue Damien for support, but there were moments standing in line at the pharmacy, debating whether I could afford both prescription medicine and new baby clothes when I felt the bitter edge of resentment. Not for myself, but for Linda. She deserved more than just getting by. My path might have continued this way indefinitely if not for the call that came when Linda was exactly 7 months old. I was bathing her in the kitchen sink, her splashes soaking my work blouse, when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Amelia? The woman's voice was tentative. It's Ava Harrington. Damien's younger sister and I had been close during my marriage, fellow outsiders in the Harrington world. After the divorce, our communication had dwindled to occasional likes on social media posts. I hadn't told her about Linda, unsure where her loyalties would lie in the split. Ava. This is a surprise. I know, and I'm sorry to call out of the blue like this. There was hesitation in her voice. It's about my father. What about him? He's dying, Amelia. The doctors are giving him weeks, maybe a month. The cancer has spread everywhere. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, meaning it despite everything. Victor Harrington had never approved of me, but he'd been a formidable figure in Damien's life, perhaps the most influential force in shaping who my ex-husband had become. He's asking to see everyone at the Christmas Eve gala. One last family gathering before. She trailed off. He specifically mentioned you, Amelia. Me? That's unexpected, that I know. But he was insistent. Said there were things left unsaid. Her voice lowered. I think he regrets how he treated you. How he influenced Damien during your marriage. I shifted Linda to my hip, wrapping her in a towel as she babbled happily. I don't think that's a good idea, Ava. Damien and I haven't spoken since the divorce. It would be awkward for everyone. Please, Amelia. There was genuine pleading in her voice. It might be your last chance to say goodbye. And honestly, I could use the moral support. The vultures are already circling, positioning themselves now that father is vulnerable. I hesitated, bouncing Linda gently as she started to fuss. What Ava didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that attending meant introducing Victor Harrington to the granddaughter he didn't know existed. It meant confronting Damien with the child he'd never acknowledged. I'll think about it, I said finally. That's all I can promise. That's all I'm asking. And Amelia? Damien will be there, but he'll be focused on father. You probably won't even need to speak to him. What Ava didn't say, what I later learned she didn't know at the time, was that Christmas Eve had been chosen for more than just a family gathering. It was to be the official announcement of Damien's engagement to Elise Winters, a strategic alliance designed to strengthen the Harrington empire. It was to be his coronation as the next CEO, fulfilling the destiny his father had planned since his birth. I spent days weighing my options. Part of me wanted to respect Victor's dying wish, to give the man a chance to make peace before the end. Another part feared putting Linda in the spotlight, exposing her to the toxic Harrington dynamics I'd fought to escape. But the strongest impulse was one I barely acknowledged even to myself. After months of being ignored, part of me wanted Damien to know what he'd missed. Wanted him to see the beautiful child he'd never bothered to discover. The night before the gala, I made my decision. I called Ava. "I'll come, but there's something you should know. Something no one in your family knows yet." I told her about Linda, about my attempts to contact Damien, about the returned letter. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Bring her," Ava said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "Bring my niece home for Christmas, Amelia." The night of the gala, I dressed Linda in a velvet dress I'd found at a consignment shop, deep green with a delicate lace collar. I braided tiny silver ribbons into her dark curls and slipped soft leather shoes onto her tiny feet. For myself, I chose the one designer dress I'd kept from my marriage, a simple black sheath that had cost more than my first month's rent in New York. If we were walking into the lion's den, we would do so with dignity. The snow was falling steadily as my taxi approached the Harrington estate, the wrought iron gates opening silently at the guard's recognition. The long driveway curved through snow-covered grounds, past illuminated sculptures and bare-branched trees wrapped in tiny white lights. The mansion itself blazed with warmth, every window glowing against the dark winter night. For a moment, sitting in the back seat with Linda sleeping against my shoulder, I considered telling the driver to turn around. To take us back to our small apartment where things were simple, if not easy. But then I thought of Victor Harrington, facing his mortality, asking for me by name. Of Ava, waiting inside for the moral support I'd promised. Of Linda, who deserved to know her heritage, complicated as it was. So I paid the driver, clutched my daughter closer, and walked through the falling snow toward a past I thought I'd left behind forever. Now, standing in that grand foyer where my life had once begun anew and later fallen apart, I found myself face to face with the man who had given me the greatest joy and deepest pain of my life. The man who had never known he'd created something perfect in his imperfection. The man whose eyes widened in shock as he recognized the Harrington legacy in the sleeping child in my arms. I hadn't planned this confrontation for Christmas Eve. I hadn't planned it at all. But sometimes, the most important moments in our lives are the ones we never saw coming. In the quiet of the Harrington Library, while the party continued without its host and guest of honor, we really talked for the first time in years. Linda slept peacefully in a portable bassinet I'd brought, blissfully unaware of the life-changing conversations happening around her. I discovered my pregnancy 2 weeks after our divorce was finalized, I explained, watching Damien's face as he processed this information. At first, I was angry at you, at the timing, at the universe for its cruel joke. Then I was scared. Then, somewhere along the way, I was grateful. Grateful? His voice was strained. For her. I looked over at our sleeping daughter. Whatever went wrong between us, she's perfect. And if being with you meant not having her, I'd make the same choice again. Damien moved to the bassinet, studying Linda's face with a mixture of wonder and regret. She has my mother's eyes. And your stubbornness, I added with a small smile. She knows what she wants and lets nothing stand in her way. He looked up at me, his expression raw. Why wouldn't my office give me your messages? Why would Claire turn you away? I don't know, Damien. Perhaps she thought she was protecting you from your messy past. Perhaps your father gave instructions. Perhaps she simply didn't believe me when I said it was important. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so achingly familiar. I'll find out. Someone made this decision, and they had no right. Does it matter now? I asked quietly. The damage is done. 7 months of her life you can never get back. Of course it matters. His voice rose slightly before he caught himself, glancing at the sleeping baby. It matters because I need to know who kept my daughter from me. Who decided I didn't deserve to know she existed. I studied him, trying to reconcile the man before me with the cold, distant person who had signed our divorce papers without a flicker of emotion. You really didn't know? No, Amelia. I swear to you. I would never. He stopped, emotion choking his words. I would never have abandoned my child. No matter what happened between us. I believed him. Despite everything, despite the pain and the silence and the months of struggling alone, I believed him. The realization didn't erase the hurt, but it shifted something inside me, a hard knot of resentment beginning, ever so slightly, to loosen. He told me about the slow suffocation of becoming what his father demanded, about the emptiness of his so-called success, about going through the motions of an engagement that felt like another corporate merger. Elise and I, it's not. He struggled to find the words. It's a business arrangement, not a love match. Victor orchestrated it. The Winters family controls keyboard seats we needed. In return, they wanted the Harrington name and connections. So romantic, I said dryly. Does she know that's how you see it? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. She knows exactly what this is. Her father made sure she understood the terms before he agreed to the merger. That's literally what he called it. William Winters is possibly the only person more calculating than my father. And you agreed to this? I thought it was the price of finally gaining control. Father promised once the engagement was announced, he'd step down as CEO. Hand over the reins completely. I'd finally be able to implement the changes I've been fighting for. I looked at him thoughtfully. The changes we used to talk about. Using technology to create opportunities, not just wealth. Yes. His eyes lit up for a moment, reminding me of the Damien I'd fallen in love with. The Innovation Fund for Underserved Communities. The education initiatives. All the things we planned before. Before you became your father, I finished for him. His face fell. Yes. Before that. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of lost dreams and wasted years hanging between us. I don't expect anything from you, I said as Linda continued to sleep peacefully. I've managed for 7 months. I'll continue managing. That's not acceptable. His voice was firm. She deserves better than a father who manages his responsibility. She deserves someone fully present in her life. And you deserve recognition for doing this alone when you shouldn't have had to. What are you suggesting? Co-parenting. Real co-parenting, not weekend visits and holiday exchanges. I want to be there for fevers and nightmares and first steps. I want to know her, Amelia. And... He hesitated. I'd like the chance to know you again too. That's not how this works, Damien. You don't get to step back into my life because we share DNA with the same small human. I know. He nodded. Trust is earned, not granted. I'm prepared to earn it, one day at a time. I studied him carefully, looking for the calculating businessman, the ruthless negotiator. Instead, I saw something I hadn't seen in years, the man who had once built free apps for nonprofits. The man who had dreams beyond balance sheets. Start with tonight, I said finally. Go deal with your father, with Elise, with whatever fallout comes. Show me who you really are when it matters. Then we'll talk about tomorrow. He nodded, understanding the challenge. Before leaving the library, he knelt beside the bassinet, studying Linda's sleeping face with wonder. I missed the beginning of her story, he said quietly. I won't miss the rest. I didn't tell him I believed him. Trust, as I'd said, would need to be earned. But watching him touch Linda's tiny hand, I allowed myself to feel something I'd abandoned months ago: hope. Outside, snow continued to fall on the Harrington estate, covering the manicured perfection with something new and untouched. By morning, the landscape would be transformed, the familiar made strange, the rigid lines softened. A blank page, waiting for whatever story we chose to write next. If you believe people deserve second chances when they truly change, share this video right now. And subscribe to Mr. Arden's Heart Stories to hear what happened next in this story of love, loss, and unexpected redemption. The confrontation with Victor and Elise happened simultaneously, a perfect storm of long-suppressed truths finally breaking free. Damien had asked me to wait in the library with Linda while he handled both conversations, but fate had other plans. I had just checked my phone, realizing it was nearly 10 o'clock, far later than Linda's usual bedtime, when the library door burst open. Elise Winters stood framed in the doorway, her perfect composure shattered. Behind her, Victor Harrington leaned heavily on an ornate cane, his face flushed with anger despite the pallor of his illness. "So this is why my son has thrown away everything we've worked for," Victor said, his voice razor-sharp despite his weakened state. "A baby that conveniently appears just as he's about to secure his future." I instinctively moved to stand between them and the bassinet where Linda still miraculously slept. "Mr. Harrington, this isn't the time or place for this conversation. When exactly would be convenient for you, Miss Kaplan?" His tone dripped with sarcasm. "Perhaps after you've extracted maximum financial benefit from this situation." "Father, that's enough." Damien appeared behind them, his expression thunderous. "I asked you both for privacy." "Privacy?" Elise laughed, the sound brittle and harsh. "You announced to half of Manhattan's elite that you can't possibly go through with our engagement because you've just discovered you're a father, and you expect privacy." I glanced at Damien, raising an eyebrow. "Half of Manhattan?" He had the grace to look slightly abashed. I may have been somewhat direct in explaining why I couldn't make the announcement. "Direct is one way to put it," Elise snapped. "Standing on the grand staircase and announcing that the engagement is off because your ex-wife just walked in with your secret baby is somewhat beyond direct, Damien. It's career suicide. Social suicide." "I didn't announce Linda was mine," Damien corrected. "I simply said I needed to address an unexpected family situation." "Everyone saw her." Elise gestured wildly toward the bassinet. "Everyone saw those Harrington eyes. Do you think they're idiots?" The confrontation in the library continued, tensions rising with each passing moment. Linda stirred in her bassinet, perhaps sensing the hostility filling the room. I reached down to soothe her before she could fully wake. "Watch what you say about my daughter," I warned Elise, keeping my voice low but firm. "Your daughter?" Victor stepped further into the room, his illness momentarily forgotten in his anger. "If she is indeed a Harrington, she belongs to our family. Our legacy." "She's a 7-month-old baby, not a corporate asset," I countered, feeling my own anger rising. "And yes, she's my daughter. I'm the one who's been there for every moment of her life while your son didn't even know she existed." "A mistake I intend to rectify," Damien interjected, moving to stand beside me. "Father, Elise, I understand you're both upset, but this isn't helping anyone. Linda is my daughter. I've seen the timeline, I've seen the evidence. There's no question." Elisa's perfect features contorted with frustration. "And this changes everything. A child you didn't know about until 2 hours ago suddenly matters more than everything we've built." "Yes," Damien said simply. "It does." The clarity in his voice startled everyone, even me. There was no hesitation, no calculation, just absolute certainty. Victor shook his head slowly, leaning more heavily on his cane. "You're making a mistake that will haunt you for the rest of your life, son. The Winters merger would have secured Harrington capital for generations. William will pull his support from the board when he hears about this. You'll lose the CEO position." "Perhaps," Damien acknowledged. "But I'll gain something far more valuable." He moved to the bassinet and gently lifted Linda, who had awakened during the confrontation. Instead of crying at the stranger holding her, she stared up at him with those amber-flecked eyes, then reached for his face with curious fingers. Something in Victor's expression shifted as he watched this interaction, a subtle softening around his eyes, a slight tremor in his hand. "She has Catherine's eyes," he said quietly, mentioning his late wife for the first time in years. "Yes," I responded, surprised by his observation. "She does." "May I?" Victor hesitated, suddenly looking every bit the dying man he was rather than the fearsome titan of industry. "May I see her closer?" Damien glanced at me, silently asking permission. I nodded slightly, though I stayed close as he carried Linda to his father. Victor Harrington, the man who had made presidents wait for meetings and CEOs quake with fear, looked utterly humbled as he gazed at his granddaughter. "Hello there, little one," he whispered. "You're quite the disruptor, aren't you? A true Harrington after all." Linda, demonstrating her usual fearlessness, reached out and grabbed Victor's finger with her tiny hand. The stoic businessman blinked rapidly, emotion breaking through his carefully constructed facade. Elise watched this tableau with growing realization. "This isn't a negotiating tactic, is it?" she asked Damien. "You're really choosing them over everything." "I'm choosing to be the father my daughter deserves," Damien replied. "The man I should have been all along. Not the one my father tried to shape me into." He looked directly at Elise. "I'm sorry. You deserve better than a marriage of convenience." "We both do." She studied him for a long moment, then glanced at Linda, still holding Victor's finger. To my surprise, a genuine smile briefly touched her lips. "Well, she is rather perfect, isn't she?" Elise sighed. "My father will be furious, but I suspect in time he'll be relieved. I was never cut out to be a proper Harrington wife anyway." With unexpected grace, she removed the massive ruby engagement ring and placed it on a nearby table. "I'll handle the press," she offered. A mutual decision to part as friends before any formal announcement. "It's better for everyone's reputation that way." "Thank you," Damien said sincerely. "Don't thank me yet," Elise warned, though without malice. "The corporate sharks will start circling as soon as William pulls his board support. And they'll use this situation against you." She glanced meaningfully at Linda and me. "I've been swimming with sharks my entire life," Damien replied. "I'll manage." After Elise departed, an awkward silence fell over the library. Victor continued to stare at Linda with a complex mixture of emotions playing across his face. "She should have a trust established," he said finally, his business mind apparently unable to stop working even in this moment. "I'll have the family attorneys draw up the paperwork tomorrow. And she'll need to be added to the family records, of course." "That's not necessary," I began, but Victor waved away my objection. "She's a Harrington," he insisted. "Whatever else happens, she deserves the security that comes with the name." "Our daughter has a name," I corrected gently. "It's Linda Kaplan." "Linda Harrington Kaplan would be more appropriate," Victor countered, a hint of his usual authoritative tone returning. "We can discuss names another time," Damien intervened, seeing my expression harden. "Father, you should return to the party. Your guests will be wondering where you've gone." Victor reluctantly relinquished Linda's tiny hand. "Yes, I suppose there are announcements to be unmade." He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "Damien, whatever disagreements we've had, she is extraordinary. Don't make the same mistakes I did." With that cryptic statement, he departed, leaving Damien and me alone with our daughter. I exhaled slowly, the tension of the confrontation finally draining from my body. "That went better than expected." Damien carefully returned Linda to the bassinet. "My father actually backed down. I've never seen that happen before." "Linda has that effect on people," I said with a small smile. "She walks into a room and suddenly everything else seems less important." "I've noticed." He turned to face me fully. "Amelia, I meant what I said. I want to be part of her life, part of both your lives, if you'll let me. Not because of obligation or guilt, but because seeing her made me remember who I used to be. Who I still want to be. It's not that simple, Damien. You can't just walk back into my life because biology connected us again. Too much has happened. I know, he acknowledged. But can we start somewhere? Maybe with regular visits, pediatrician appointments, a consistent schedule. I want to earn your trust again, even if it takes years. I studied his face, looking for any sign of the calculating businessman who had replaced my husband. Instead, I saw only sincerity and hope. We can start with dinner, I offered. Tomorrow night at my apartment. 7 o'clock. You can help with her bedtime routine and see what her normal life is like, not this Harrington glamour, but reality. Relief washed over his features. I'll be there. Should I bring anything? Just yourself. And Damien? I added as I gathered our things to leave. Don't be late. Babies don't wait for billionaires. If you've ever had to rebuild trust after it was broken, you know it's not an overnight process. Comment one day at a time if you understand that real change happens through consistent small actions, not grand gestures. The next evening arrived with a nervous energy I hadn't felt since our first date 6 years earlier. I'd spent the day alternating between cleaning my modest apartment and questioning my decision to invite Damien into our carefully constructed world. By 6:30, Linda was fed and playing on her activity mat while I checked my reflection for the 4th time in 10 minutes. What am I doing? I muttered to myself, smoothing down a shirt that had definitely seen better days. This isn't a date. It's co-parenting coordination. Linda responded with a happy gurgle, batting at the colorful toys hanging above her with impressive determination. At least one of us is excited, I told her, bending down to kiss her forehead. Just remember, your father might be a billionaire, but that doesn't mean he gets to spoil you rotten. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. I took a deep breath, silently reminding myself that this was about Linda, not the complicated emotions still swirling between Damien and me. When I opened the door, I momentarily didn't recognize the man standing in the hallway. Gone was the impeccable suit and power tie from the night before. Instead, Damien wore jeans, a simple gray sweater, and casual boots. His hair was slightly damp, as though he'd just showered, and he carried nothing but a small gift bag. "Hi," he said, suddenly looking as nervous as I felt. "I hope this is okay. I came straight from the office but changed before coming over." "It's fine," I assured him, stepping back to let him enter. "You look more like the Damien I used to know." A small smile touched his lips. "That's the idea." He hesitated just inside the doorway, taking in my apartment with curious eyes. The contrast to the Harrington estate couldn't have been more stark. My one-bedroom Brooklyn walk-up was clean and comfortable but undeniably modest. IKEA furniture, second-hand bookshelves, prints instead of original artwork. Linda's presence was evident everywhere, the bassinet in the corner of the living room, the baby swing near the window, toys scattered across every surface. "It's not much," I said, suddenly self-conscious, "but it's home." "It's perfect," Damien replied with unexpected sincerity. "It feels lived in. Real." A squeal from Linda interrupted the moment. She had spotted Damien from her activity mat and was reaching toward him with excited hands. "I think someone remembers you," I observed as we moved further into the apartment. Damien's entire demeanor changed as he approached Linda, his face lighting up with a joy I hadn't seen in years. "Hello there, beautiful girl," he said, kneeling beside the mat. "Do you mind if I pick her up?" "She's your daughter too," I reminded him. "You don't need permission every time." He gathered Linda carefully into his arms, still somewhat awkward but with growing confidence. She immediately grabbed for his face, fascinated by the stubble on his jawline. "I bought her something," he said, nodding toward the gift bag he'd set down. "It's nothing extravagant, I promise." I retrieved the bag and peered inside, half expecting some outrageous designer baby item. Instead, I found a simple stuffed elephant, soft and perfect for a baby's hands. "It's the first thing I saw that made me think of her," Damien explained, watching my reaction. "In the store window on my walk from the subway. I know she probably has 100 toys already, but... She doesn't, actually, I said, touched by the simple gift. And she loves elephants. How did you know? Lucky guess, he smiled, watching as Linda immediately reached for the toy when I held it out to her. She has good taste. Dinner was simpler than anything Damien had eaten in years. Homemade pasta with vegetables and a side salad, but he ate with genuine appreciation, balancing Linda on his knee when she demanded to be part of the conversation. We talked about her routine, her preferences, her development. I showed him her baby book, filled with milestones he had missed but could now witness through photos and my handwritten notes. She rolled over at 3 months. He asked, impressed. That's early, isn't it? Everything about her is early, I confirmed. The pediatrician says she's advanced in all her developmental markers. Apparently, she inherited your impatience. After dinner came bath time, with Damien watching attentively as I demonstrated the proper water temperature, the special baby wash for sensitive skin, how to support her head and body. Would you like to try? I offered, stepping back from the baby tub set up on the kitchen counter. He looked terrified but determined. What if I do it wrong? Then she'll cry and I'll help. That's how parenting works, trial and error with lots of crying. Sometimes even the baby cries too. His surprised laugh broke the tension, and soon he was carefully washing Linda's dark curls while she splashed happily, soaking his sweater in the process. I think she's enjoying this a little too much, he observed, wiping water from his face as Linda landed another direct hit. She's a water baby, I explained. Bath time is her favorite part of the day. Wait until you see what happens when I take her out. On cue, Linda's happy splashing turned to indignant protests when I lifted her from the warm water. Her face scrunched up in displeasure, tiny fists clenched in outrage at this betrayal. Now this expression I recognize, Damien commented as I wrapped her in a hooded towel. It's exactly how the board looks when I tell them no. The bedtime routine continued with diaper change, pajamas, a bottle, and a story. Damien sat in the rocking chair beside the bassinet, Linda cradled in his arms as I handed him a well-worn copy of Goodnight Moon. This was your favorite, he remembered, running a finger along the book's spine. You used to read it to your sister's kids when they visited. You remember that? I asked, surprised by this detail from our past. I remember everything, Amelia, he said quietly, his eyes meeting mine. Every detail, every moment. I just lost sight of what mattered for a while. The sincerity in his voice threatened to unravel the careful emotional boundaries I'd constructed. I stepped back, creating physical distance to match the emotional one I needed to maintain. She'll probably fall asleep before you finish the book, I said, changing the subject. Just rock her a little after you're done reading. I busied myself tidying the kitchen while Damien read to Linda, his deep voice carrying softly through the apartment. When I returned 15 minutes later, both father and daughter were asleep in the rocking chair, the book fallen to the floor beside them. Linda's tiny hand gripped Damien's sweater, her face peaceful against his chest. His head had tilted to one side, his expression more relaxed than I'd seen it in years. I stood watching them for a moment, conflicting emotions washing over me. This was the picture I'd once imagined for our future before ambition and family pressure had twisted Damien into someone I couldn't recognize. Seeing it now, even as a temporary moment, filled me with both longing and caution. Gently, I lifted Linda from his arms, careful not to wake either of them. As I settled her into the bassinet, Damien stirred, blinking in momentary confusion. I fell asleep, he realized, embarrassed. I'm sorry. Don't be, I said softly. It happens to all new parents. Besides, you've had an eventful 24 hours. He stood, stretching slightly before moving to peer into the bassinet where Linda slept peacefully. She's amazing, Amelia. You've done an incredible job with her. Thank you. I've been figuring it out as I go. He turned to face me, his expression serious. I'd like to do this again. Regularly. Maybe a few times a week. I want to learn everything about her schedule, her preferences, what each cry means. I want to be a real father, not just a weekend visitor. I considered his request. Despite my lingering reservations, I couldn't deny that Linda deserved to know her father. And the man standing before me tonight seemed more like the Damien I'd fallen in love with than the stranger he'd become. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, I offered. And maybe Sunday afternoons. We can work around her routine in both our schedules. Relief washed over his features. Thank you. I promise I won't let either of you down again. Don't make promises yet, I cautioned. Just show up. Consistently. That's what matters most. As he gathered his things to leave, an awkward moment hung between us, the strange formality of ending an evening that had felt surprisingly natural despite everything. I should go, he said, lingering by the door. Early meeting tomorrow. Victor wants to discuss things. I can imagine, I replied, thinking of the patriarch's likely reaction to Damien's choices. Will you be okay? I've been preparing for this confrontation my entire adult life, he said with a wry smile. I just didn't expect it would be over something so important. He hesitated, then added, thank you for tonight. For letting me into her life. Into your life again, even just a little. She deserves to know her father, I said simply. The rest, we'll figure it out day by day. After he left, I stood by the bassinet watching Linda sleep, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Just 24 hours ago, our world had contained just the two of us. Now it had expanded to include Damien, with all the complications and possibilities that entailed. Would you still be rooting for Amelia and Damien to reconnect, or is there too much broken trust to repair? Drop a heart if you believe they deserve a second chance at love, or comment, co-parents only, if you think they should keep their relationship strictly about Linda. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm to our lives. True to his word, Damien appeared reliably on Tuesday and Thursday evenings and Sunday afternoons. He arrived promptly, always in casual clothes rather than business attire, often bringing thoughtful gifts for Linda, a soft toy, a board book, a music box that played Beethoven, her favorite, I'd mentioned once in passing. More importantly, he paid attention. He learned how Linda liked to be held, which food she preferred, what songs would soothe her when she was fussy. He downloaded apps to track her development and asked thoughtful questions about her care. When she caught her first cold, he appeared at our door with pediatrician-recommended remedies and stayed up with us through the night, taking turns walking the floor with her feverish, miserable little body. The outside world intruded on our fragile new arrangement in predictable ways. The business press had a field day with the broken engagement and the sudden appearance of a Harrington heir. Speculation ran wild, most of it painting me as a calculating gold digger who had hidden Damien's child to maximize financial leverage. Harrington heir jilts Winter's heiress for secret baby mama, one particularly tasteless headline proclaimed. Ignore it, Damien advised when he found me fuming over the article. My PR team is handling it. The story will die down eventually. Easy for you to say, I countered. You're the billionaire businessman making the noble choice to acknowledge your child. I'm the scheming ex who trapped you with a baby. No one who matters believes that, he insisted. And Linda will never see those stories. But she will someday, I pointed out. When she's old enough to Google her parents, this is what she'll find. The next day, Damien's PR team released a joint statement explaining that Linda was born after our divorce, that I had attempted to notify him of the pregnancy, and that communication failures, not deliberate concealment, had prevented him from knowing about his daughter sooner. It didn't completely stop the speculation, but it helped redirect the narrative. The corporate fallout was more severe. As Victor had predicted, William Winters pulled his support from the board, along with several key allies. Damien's path to the CEO position suddenly faced significant obstacles. During our Sunday afternoon outings to the park, he would occasionally take business calls, his expression growing more tense with each conversation. Everything okay? I asked one chilly afternoon as we pushed Linda in her stroller through Prospect Park. The fall leaves crunched beneath our feet, and she babbled happily at the golden canopy above us. Just the usual corporate warfare, he sighed, tucking his phone away. Father is officially stepping down next month, but the board is divided on his replacement. The Winters faction is pushing for an outside candidate. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. I know how much you've worked for this. He looked thoughtful, watching as a squirrel darted across our path, capturing Linda's delighted attention. You know what's strange? I'm not as upset as I should be. For years, becoming CEO was all I thought about. Now. He glanced down at Linda, who was pointing excitedly at the retreating squirrel. Now I find myself wondering if it's really what I want anymore. What would you want instead? I asked, curious about this shift in his priorities. Remember Nexus Tech? My startup before Father absorbed it into Harrington Capital? Of course. It was brilliant, using algorithm-driven investment tools to fund community development projects that traditional banks wouldn't touch. It was what made me fall in love with your mind in the first place. He looked surprised, then pleased by this admission. I've been thinking about reviving it, he admitted. Not as part of Harrington Capital, but as its own entity. Using my personal funds, not the family fortune. That sounds more like the Damien I used to know, I observed, trying to ignore the flutter of my heart at seeing glimpses of the man I'd married. I think he's finding his way back, he said quietly, his eyes meeting mine. It just took a tiny 7-month-old to show him the path. As autumn faded into winter, Linda continued to thrive. She pulled herself up to standing, cruised along furniture with growing confidence, and developed a vocabulary of babbles that seemed like complete sentences in her mind. Damien was there for many of these milestones, recording her first tentative steps between the coffee table and sofa, celebrating when Dada joined Mama in her limited but enthusiastic vocabulary. Victor Harrington's health declined rapidly as Christmas approached. Despite our complicated history, I found myself feeling sympathy for the once formidable man now confined to his bed, his imposing frame diminished by illness. Damien visited his father daily, sometimes taking Linda with him when I could join them after work. To my surprise, Victor transformed in Linda's presence. The ruthless businessman disappeared, replaced by a doting grandfather who delighted in her every movement. He kept a music box beside his bed that played only for her, and his harsh features softened whenever she reached for him with her tiny hands. She has the Harrington determination, he observed one evening as we watched her repeatedly attempt to stack blocks despite their tendency to topple. But she has your creativity, Amelia. The way she approaches problems, she sees possibilities others would miss. I accepted the rare compliment with grace, recognizing the effort it cost him. Thank you. She's definitely her own person already. Damien says you've refused the trust fund I established for her, Victor continued, his directness unchanged by his illness. She doesn't need Harrington money to secure her future, I replied evenly. Damien contributes more than enough for her care, and I'm perfectly capable of providing for her. It's not about need, Victor countered, watching as Damien helped Linda build her tower higher. It's about what's rightfully hers as a Harrington. He hesitated, then added more softly, it's also an old man's attempt to make amends for past mistakes. I studied him, seeing beyond the intimidating facade to the dying man beneath. What mistakes would those be, Mr. Harrington? I pushed Damien to become someone he wasn't meant to be, he admitted, his voice weaker than I'd ever heard it. I saw only one path to success, my path. In doing so, I nearly destroyed what made him exceptional in the first place. His gaze shifted to me. And I cost him the one person who saw him clearly. Before I could respond to this unexpected confession, Linda toddled over to Victor's bed, offering him a block as a gift. The conversation shifted, the moment of vulnerability passing as Victor accepted the treasure with exaggerated delight. Later that evening, as Damien walked us to the car waiting to take us home, snow began to fall in large, gentle flakes. Linda reached for them with wonder, her first experience with winter's magic. My father asked for something unusual today, Damien said, helping me secure Linda in her car seat. He wants us all to spend Christmas Eve at the estate. A proper family gathering, he called it. Is that what we are now? A proper family? I asked, straightforward but without bitterness. Damien closed the car door and turned to face me, snowflakes catching in his dark hair. I think we're finding our way towards something that works for us, he said carefully. Whatever label we put on it. The snow fell harder around us, creating a private cocoon of white. For a moment, I was transported back to our first winter together, when everything seemed possible and our futures stretched bright and interconnected before us. I'll consider it, I said finally. For Linda's sake. And for Victor's. He nodded, understanding the concession this represented. He started to step back, then paused. Amelia? Would you consider having dinner with me sometime? Just the two of us. The invitation hung between us, weighted with possibility and risk. My heart, which I'd so carefully guarded these past months, beat a little faster. Why? I asked simply. Because I miss talking to you, he answered with equal simplicity. Not just about Linda, though that's the most important thing. But about ideas, possibilities, the things that used to keep us up talking until dawn. I miss my friend. I miss my wife. I'm not your wife anymore, Damien. I know, he acknowledged. But maybe, someday, we could find our way to being more than just co-parents. I studied his face in the falling snow, searching for any sign of the man who had broken my heart. Instead, I saw only earnest hope and tentative vulnerability. One step at a time, I said finally. Dinner might be a good place to start. But Damien? If we do this, if we try again in any capacity, it has to be different. Completely different. I'm counting on it, he replied, a genuine smile transforming his features. I'm not the same man who lost you, Amelia. And I don't want to be. As the car pulled away, I watched him standing in the falling snow, a solitary figure growing smaller in the distance. Linda babbled happily in her car seat, perhaps recognizing that something significant had just occurred between her parents. I'm not sure about this, little one, I whispered to her. But maybe some things broken can still be mended. Maybe some mistakes deserve second chances. If you've ever had to choose between protecting your heart and taking a risk on love again, you know exactly how Amelia feels right now. Comment, leap of faith, if you've ever had to decide whether to trust someone who hurt you before. The days leading up to Christmas passed in a blur of activity. Linda cut her first tooth, a milestone marked by sleepless nights and cranky days. The museum hosted its holiday gala, requiring long hours of preparation. Damien finalized the paperwork to launch his revived Nexus tech venture, independent from Harrington Capital. Our dinner, just the two of us, took place at a small Italian restaurant in my neighborhood, far from the upscale establishments where Damien typically conducted business meals. We arrived separately, me from the museum and Damien from his office, meeting at the door like strangers on a first date rather than people who had once shared everything. Is this weird? He asked as we were seated at a corner table, candlelight flickering between us. It feels a little weird. Completely weird, I agreed with a small smile. But maybe weird is okay. The awkwardness dissolved as we began to talk about work initially, safe neutral territory. He explained his vision for the new Nexus tech, focused on sustainable community investment models that could be replicated globally. I shared my latest exhibition concept, using digital technology to make master works accessible to underserved schools. Somewhere between the pasta and dessert, we found our rhythm again, that intellectual connection that had first drawn us together. We debated ideas, challenged each other's thinking, built on concepts until they transformed into something neither of us had initially imagined. We should write this down, Damien said excitedly, sketching a diagram on a napkin. An educational platform that combines art accessibility with targeted micro-investments in school programs. It was like watching the old Damien emerge from hibernation, eyes bright with purpose, mind racing with possibilities, the corporate mask completely forgotten. This was the man I'd fallen in love with, the visionary who saw connections others missed. We closed the restaurant down, the owner finally shooing us out with good-natured complaints about needing to go home to his family. Outside, the December air was crisp and clear, stars visible despite the city lights. I had a good time tonight, I admitted as we walked slowly toward my apartment. It felt like before, he finished. Before everything got complicated. Before I lost sight of what mattered. We stopped at the corner where we would normally part ways, me to my walk-up, him to the car service that would take him back to Manhattan. Neither of us moved to leave. I've been thinking about what went wrong with us, Damien said quietly, his breath visible in the cold air. It wasn't just the pressure from my father or the company demands. No. What was it then? I stopped talking to you, he said simply. Really talking, like we did tonight. Sharing ideas, dreams, fears. Somewhere along the way, I started thinking I had to handle everything alone. Protect you from the ugly parts of business, shield you from my doubts. I built walls when I should have been building bridges. The honesty in his voice touched something deep inside me, a place I'd protected carefully since our divorce. I stopped pushing, I admitted in return. When you first started changing, I fought for the man I knew was still there. But after a while, it seemed easier to let you go than to keep fighting for someone who didn't seem to want to be found. I wanted to be found, he whispered. I just didn't know how to ask for help. We stood in silence, the weight of past mistakes and missed opportunities hanging between us. Then, with careful deliberation, he reached for my hand. I allowed my fingers to entwine with his, the familiar touch both strange and comforting. I don't expect everything to magically heal overnight, Damien said, his eyes meeting mine in the glow of the street lamp. But I'd like the chance to try again. To rebuild what we had, but stronger this time. Wiser. I've been thinking about chess lately, I told him, watching his expression shift to curious confusion at the apparent non-sequitur. My grandfather taught me to play when I was little, and he always said that the best players weren't the ones who never lost pieces, they were the ones who knew how to adapt when things went wrong. How to create a new strategy from a difficult position. That he nodded slowly, understanding dawning. And we're in a difficult position. But not an impossible one, I conceded. Just, complicated. With a lot of history. And a very important little person depending on both of us to get it right this time. So where does that leave us? He asked, the vulnerability in his voice breaking down my last defenses. I think, I said carefully, it leaves us taking things one day at a time. Building something new rather than trying to recreate the past. And being completely honest with each other, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. I'd like that, he said softly. Very much. When he leaned forward to kiss me, it felt both familiar and entirely a new beginning rather than an echo of what had been lost. Brief and gentle, a question rather than a claim. I'll see you on Sunday? I asked as we finally parted. Sunday, he confirmed. And Christmas Eve, if you're still considering it. I am, I assured him. For Linda's sake. And maybe a little bit for ours too. As I watched him walk away, I felt something shift inside me, not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but an opening. A willingness to believe that people could change, that mistakes could lead to growth, that love might be stronger the second time around because of the hardships it had endured. Christmas Eve arrived with a light snowfall that transformed the city into a postcard-perfect holiday scene. I dressed Linda in a red velvet dress with tiny silver stars embroidered along the hem as a gift from Ava, who had become a devoted aunt over the past months. For myself, I chose simple elegance, a midnight blue dress that I'd purchased for the museum's holiday gala, classic rather than trendy. Damien came to pick us up personally rather than sending a car. He looked handsome in a charcoal suit with no tie, more relaxed than the corporate warrior he'd become during our marriage. When he appeared at my door with a small bouquet of white roses, my favorite, though I was surprised he remembered, I felt a flutter of nervous anticipation that had nothing to do with facing the Harrington family gathering. "You look beautiful," he said simply, his appreciative gaze lingering a moment before shifting to Linda, who was attempting to eat one of her silver dress shoes. "And you, Miss Linda, are absolutely stunning, even with slightly damp footwear." The drive to the Harrington estate was filled with Linda's excited babbling as she watched the Christmas lights passing outside the car window. Damien and I maintained a comfortable conversation, both carefully avoiding any mention of the growing tension between us, the good kind of tension, electric and hopeful. "This is very different from my last visit," I observed as we approached the iron gates. "No secret baby reveal planned tonight, I hope." "No more secrets," he promised, reaching over to squeeze my hand briefly. "Just family, however complicated that might be." The Harrington Christmas Eve gathering was traditionally a formal affair with hundreds of guests from New York's social and business elite. This year, however, Victor had scaled it back dramatically. Only family and a few close friends filled the main drawing room, where a massive tree glittered with ornaments collected over generations. A fire crackled in the marble fireplace, and tasteful decorations adorned every surface. Victor himself had been moved downstairs for the occasion, his hospital bed replaced by a specially designed chair that allowed him to sit upright while still providing necessary support. Despite his evident weakness, he brightened visibly when we entered with Linda. "There she is," he said, his voice thin but warm. "Come here, little one. Let grandfather see how much you've grown." Linda, recognizing Victor from our visits, reached for him eagerly. I allowed him to hold her, though I stayed close, aware of his fragility. "She's wearing the stars," he noted, touching the embroidery on her dress. "Catherine would have loved that. She always said children should wear stars to remember they came from something magical." The sentiment surprised me, so unlike the pragmatic businessmen I'd known. "She picked this dress herself," I told him. "Reached for it over all the others Ava showed her." "Good taste already," Victor approved. "And a strong will. A true Harrington woman." The evening progressed with surprising warmth. Ava and her husband made Linda the center of attention, delighting in her attempts to toddle around the room. Victor watched it all with a contentment I'd never seen in him before, as though witnessing his family's future eased his concerns about leaving it. After dinner, while Linda was being entertained by Ava's children, Damien drew me aside into his father's study, the same room where our confrontation had occurred exactly 1 month earlier. "I have something for you," he said, suddenly seeming nervous. "Not a Christmas gift exactly. More of a question." My heart stuttered as he reached into his pocket. He couldn't possibly be, we had only just begun to reconnect. He withdrew not a ring box but a small flash drive. "I designed something," he explained, connecting it to the laptop on his father's desk. "For Linda, primarily. But also for us, if you're interested." The screen filled with the logo for a new organization, the Harrington Kaplan Foundation for Arts and Technology Education. "It's a merger of our passions," he explained as he clicked through the presentation. "Your expertise in making art accessible through technology, my focus on community investment. I've set aside initial funding, but I was hoping." He hesitated, watching my reaction carefully. "I was hoping you might consider co-directing it with me." I stared at the screen, taking in the thoughtfully designed programs, the clear mission statement, the careful alignment with both our values. This wasn't an impulsive gesture or an attempt to buy my affection. This was Damien speaking my language, offering partnership, shared purpose, meaningful work. "You did all this in a month?" I asked, genuinely impressed by the detailed planning. "I've had the idea since we separated," he admitted. "It was originally going to be a wedding gift, before everything fell apart that I kept word. King on it anyway, even though I thought you'd never see it. It helped me feel connected to you somehow, even when we were apart." The vulnerability in his admission touched me deeply. "You never mentioned this during our divorce." "How could I?" he asked softly. "It would have seemed like I was trying to manipulate you into staying." And maybe I was afraid you'd reject it and reject this last piece of us I was trying to preserve. I wouldn't have rejected it, I told him honestly. It's beautiful, Damien. Thoughtful and purposeful in all the right ways. Does that mean you'll consider it? Working together again? He looked so hopeful, so unlike the confident businessman the world knew. I think, I said carefully, I'd like to hear more details. Specifically about how we balance this with our other commitments. With Linda. With building whatever is happening between us. Relief washed over his features. That's not a no. It's definitely not a no, I confirmed with a small smile. It's a, let's talk about this like the adults we've hopefully become. He laughed at that, the tension breaking. Fair enough. I have spreadsheets and projections, if you'd like to see them. Later, I promised. For now, let's just enjoy Christmas Eve with your family. Our family, I corrected myself, the words feeling strange but not unwelcome. When we returned to the main room, Victor was holding Linda again, speaking to her in low tones as though sharing important secrets. She listened with uncharacteristic stillness, her amber-flecked eyes fixed on his face. What are you telling my daughter? I asked, joining them by the fire. Victor looked up, a hint of his old shrewdness in his expression. Just passing along some Harrington wisdom. The kind that skips a generation sometimes. Don't teach her hostile takeover strategies before she can talk, Damien joked, placing a hand lightly on my back. Victor's gaze moved between us, noting the subtle shift in our dynamic. I see some negotiations have progressed favorably, he observed with a small smile. We're discussing possibilities, I said diplomatically. Taking things slowly. Time, my dear Amelia, Victor said with the weight of his mortality evident in his voice, is a luxury not all of us have in abundance. His attention returned to Linda, who had begun to yawn despite her determination to stay awake. She deserves to see her parents happy, whether together or apart. We're working on it, Damien assured his father, his hand still warm against my back. One day at a time. As the evening drew to a close, Linda finally surrendered to sleep, nestled in my arms as the adult spoke in hushed tones. The snow continued to fall outside, coating the estate grounds in pristine white, transforming the familiar landscape into something new and full of possibility. Damien walked with me to the guest room where Linda and I would spend the night, carrying the portable bassinet and diaper bag with practiced ease. Thank you for coming tonight, he said as he set up the bassinet near the bed. It means more than you know to my father, to me. It was the right choice, I acknowledged, gently transferring Linda from my shoulder to the bassinet. This is part of her heritage, complicated as it might be. And your father deserves to know her, especially now. And us? Damien asked, his voice carefully neutral. What do we deserve? I looked up at him, this man I had loved and lost and might be finding again in a new form. A second chance, perhaps, I offered. To get it right this time. The hope that bloomed on his face was worth the risk of those words. I'd like that very much, he said softly. When he leaned in to kiss me goodnight, I met him halfway. This kiss was different from the tentative one we'd shared after dinner, deeper, more certain, a promise rather than a question. Merry Christmas, Amelia, he whispered as we finally parted. Merry Christmas, Damien, I replied, suddenly sure that despite all the complications ahead, we were finally moving in the right direction. As he left, I moved to the window, watching the snow transform the world outside. In the bassinet, Linda slept peacefully, unaware of the journey that had brought us to this moment or the path that lay ahead. 1 year ago, I had been newly divorced, newly pregnant, and utterly alone. Now I stood in the Harrington estate on Christmas Eve, my daughter sleeping nearby, the possibility of reconciliation warming my heart despite the winter chill. Nothing was certain. We had issues still to resolve, trust still to rebuild, patterns to break and new habits to form. But standing there in the quiet of Christmas Eve, I allowed myself to believe in second chances and the possibility that sometimes, what breaks apart can come back together stronger at the mended places. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the manicured perfection of the Harrington estate with something new and untouched. By morning, the landscape would be transformed, the familiar made strange, the rigid lines softened. A blank page, waiting for whatever story we chose to write next. If you believe in the power of second chances and the possibility of rebuilding what was broken, share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe to Mr. Arden's Heart Stories for more tales that remind us that even in our darkest moments, hope and love can find their way back into our lives when we least expect it.